I had always been a bit of an adventurous spirit, always eager to try new things and explore new places. So when I saw the opportunity to take a solo trip, I jumped at the chance. I had always wanted to travel alone, to see the world on my own terms and to create memories that were just for me. I started my research by looking for the perfect place to stay. I had heard good things about Airbnb, so I decided to give it a try. I was amazed by the selection of properties available and the affordable prices. I spent hours scrolling through the website, trying to find the perfect place. Finally, I found it. A charming cottage in a quaint little town, with a garden in the back and a beautiful view of the town. I was immediately drawn to the property, and I couldn't resist booking it without a second thought. I arrived at the address a few days later, eager to start my solo adventure. But as soon as I entered the cottage, I realized something was wrong. The furniture was outdated and the wallpaper was peeling off the walls. I thought it was just because the place needed a bit of a makeover, but as I made my way to the bedroom, I realized something was off. I opened the closet door and was shocked to find a lifeless body inside. I stumbled backwards in terror and called the police. As I waited for them to arrive, I couldn't help but think about the last time I had been in a similar situation. The police arrived shortly after and started their investigation. They told me that the person who listed the Airbnb was not the actual owner of the property. Instead, it was a killer who broke into the home, killed the owner, and hid their body in the closet. I was stunned and couldn't believe what was happening. I had never felt so scared in my life. The thought of a killer being in the same house as me was unbearable. I was relieved when the police finally took me away from the cottage and into the safety of their patrol car. After the police took me away from the cottage, I was taken to the police station for questioning. They asked me about my experience with the Airbnb and what led me to the cottage. I told them everything I knew, which wasn't much. The police were skeptical of my innocence, but eventually they believed me. I spent the next few hours in the police station, waiting for the investigation to be completed. I was anxious and scared, and I just wanted to get out of there. The police finally released me, but they warned me not to leave town. I went back to the hotel, where I tried to rest and relax. But I couldn't shake the image of the dead body from my mind. I felt violated, as if my safety had been taken from me. I was grateful to have escaped with my life, but the thought of what could have happened still haunted me. The next few days were a blur. I was so overwhelmed by the experience that I could barely function. I went through the motions of daily life, but I felt like I was just going through the motions. I couldn't shake the fear that had taken hold of me. I eventually returned home, but the experience stayed with me. I was so shaken by what had happened that I couldn't bring myself to leave the house. I was scared to be away from my own home, where I felt safe. The killer was eventually caught, and I was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. But the thought of what could have happened still haunts me to this day. I will never forget the horror of finding a dead body in the closet of an Airbnb, and I hope that others will learn from my mistake. I couldn't believe my eyes when I walked into the Airbnb. It was absolutely gorgeous, with tall ceilings, hardwood floors, and big windows that let in a ton of natural light. I had been looking forward to this trip for weeks, and I felt like I had hit the jackpot with this rental. I settled into my room and took a shower, enjoying the luxurious amenities that the host had provided. However, when I climbed into bed that first night, I noticed that there was a strange energy in the air. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but something just felt off. As I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a faint rustling sound. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just my imagination, but it persisted. I eventually got out of bed and searched the room, but found nothing. It was only when I returned to bed that I heard the sound of a child's soft crying coming from under my bed. I was absolutely terrified, and I immediately jumped out of bed and turned on all the lights. I searched under the bed, but there was no one there. The crying had stopped, but I still felt like there was something in the room with me. The next day, I did some research on the Airbnb and found out that a little boy had died in the room I was staying in. It sent shivers down my spine, but I tried to brush it off and continue my trip. However, the strange occurrences didn't stop. At night, I would feel something tickling my feet, and sometimes I would wake up to find the covers pulled off of me. It was like there was a presence in the room with me, and it was getting stronger every day. One night, I had a dream about a little boy standing at the foot of my bed. He was crying and looked so sad. I tried to talk to him, but he didn't respond. It was like he was stuck in some sort of limbo, unable to move on to the other side. The experience left me shaken, and I didn't know what to do. I considered leaving the Airbnb and finding another place to stay, but I had already paid for the rental and didn't want to waste my money. I tried to ignore the little boy and his cries, but it was impossible. He was always there, in the corner of my eye, watching me. It was like he wanted something from me, but I didn't know what it was. As the days went on, I began to feel like I was losing my mind. I couldn't sleep, I couldn't relax, and I couldn't enjoy my vacation. It was like the Airbnb had become a prison, and I was trapped inside. I decided to confront the host about the little boy. I asked if he knew anything about the death in the room, and he admitted that he did. Apparently, the little boy had died of a terminal illness, and his parents had brought him to the Airbnb as a sort of last hurrah before he passed away. I was horrified. How could the host continue to rent out a house where a child had died? It felt so disrespectful and callous. I demanded that he refund my money and find me another place to stay. The host complied, but I could tell that he was angry. He didn't understand why I was making such a big deal out of it, but to me, it was a matter of respect and common decency. When I left the Airbnb, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I was free from the oppressive energy that had plagued me for the past. I decided to try out Airbnb for the first time. My friends had raved about their experiences with the service, and I wanted to see what all the fuss was about. I found a cute little place in a nice neighborhood and booked my stay for a long weekend. Upon arriving at the house, I noticed something strange. There were wall adapters on almost every wall, the kind you use to plug in your USB charger. I thought it was odd, but I brushed it off and settled into my room. As the days went on, something was off about the place. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that I was just being paranoid. But then, on the last day of my stay, I stumbled upon a shocking discovery. I was plugging in my phone when I noticed that one of the wall adapters was slightly crooked. Curiosity getting the best of me, I pulled it out of the wall and was horrified to find a tiny camera staring back at me. I immediately called the owner and demanded an explanation. He rushed over and asked us to step outside while he investigated. After a while, he returned and told us that he didn't find anything suspicious. But I knew that he was lying. I confronted him, and he eventually admitted that the cameras were his and he had been spying on us. He tried to play it off as a joke, but we weren't having it. We argued with him, packed our things, and left as soon as possible. As I walked away from the Airbnb, I couldn't help but feel violated. It was a chilling reminder that not everything is as it seems, and you can never be too careful. From now on, I'll think twice before booking another Airbnb. I thought I had found the perfect Airbnb for my vacation. A charming little house in the middle of the countryside, surrounded by fields and woods. But as soon as I arrived, something didn't feel right. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was an air of unease that seemed to permeate the place. The first night, I woke up to a strange sound. It was a knocking, slow and persistent, coming from the front door. At first, I thought it was just a dream, but then I heard it again. I got up and went to the door, but when I opened it, there was no one there. I looked around, but the street was empty and silent. The second night, the knocking came back. This time, it was louder and more urgent. I hesitated for a moment, but then I opened the door. And there he was, an old man with a worn-out coat and a worried expression on his face. "Have you seen my chihuahua?" he asked me, his voice shaking. I told him no, that I hadn't seen any dogs around here. He looked at me for a moment, his eyes filled with sadness, and then he left. I watched him walk away, feeling a strange mixture of pity and fear. The third night, the knocking was back again. This time, I didn't even bother to get up. I knew it was the old man, and I didn't want to talk to him anymore. But then I heard something else. A faint barking, coming from the darkness. I got up and went to the window. And there he was, the old man, holding a small chihuahua in his arms. He looked up and saw me, and his face lit up with a smile. He waved at me, and then he disappeared into the night. The next morning, I went to talk to the owner of the Airbnb. I told him about the old man, and he listened carefully. And then he told me something that made my blood run cold. "Someone was hit by a car in front of this house a few years ago," he said. "An old man with a chihuahua. He died on the spot, but the dog survived. They say he still wanders around here, looking for his dog." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Had I been talking to a ghost? Had I seen a dead man walking around with his dog? I left the Airbnb that day, feeling more scared and confused than ever. And even now, months later, I still think about that old man who was wandering around that place. I had always been an adventurous person, so when my friend suggested that we book an Airbnb in the middle of nowhere, I was immediately intrigued. I have never done such a thing before, so I wanted to try at least once. After looking for a while, we found one with the perfect spot. It was a cabin near the edge of a town surrounded by woods. The pictures of the cabin looked beautiful, and the reviews were glowing. It seemed like the perfect getaway from the city. As we pulled up to the cabin, I noticed that it was much more isolated than I had anticipated. It was deep in the woods, with no other houses in sight. The cabin was cool, with a stone fireplace and a rustic charm that made it feel like we were in the olden days. When night came, my friends and I gathered around the fireplace to tell some stories, as it was the perfect mood for it. There was a huge glass window right near where we were sitting, so we could see the full moon outside, along with all the trees that were swaying with the wind. As always, we told each other ghost stories. After a while, I wanted to take a piss, so I got out and went upstairs to use the bathroom. When I was about to be done, I heard a soft knocking on the door. I quickly finished my business and got out to open the door, but when I did, there was no one there. The feeling was strange and unnerving, so I quickly went down. When I got to the last step down, I looked at my friends. Somehow, something outside the big glass window caught my attention. I glanced at it and saw a girl just standing there, with her mouth wide open. Much too wide, wider than any human should be able to do. She was looking straight at me and then pointed to her mouth. I let out a huge scream. My friends quickly rushed to me, and I told them what I saw. They looked outside the window, but there was nothing there. That night, I had trouble sleeping. One of my friends was sleeping in the same room with me, so I could hear his snoring. Just when I was about to doze off, something woke me up. It was too silent. My friend's snoring was gone. I then heard a faint sound. At first it was too faint, but as I kept listening, it became louder and louder. It was the sound of waters dripping in the hallway near my bedroom. I thought someone forgot to turn off the water, but then to my horror, I felt the water coming closer and closer. When it reaches my door, I could feel my heart beeping like no tomorrow. When I thought I was gonna have a heart attack, my friend suddenly snored again, and then I heard the dripping sound just stopped. The next morning, I told my friends again what happened. They told me after going into town, we will all leave. It was a small town with a few shops and cafes. As we walked around, we noticed that the locals were giving us strange looks, almost like they knew something we didn't. My friend went up to one and they started having a conversation. It turned out that there used to be a cemetery near where we were staying, but there was an earthquake there. The earthquake had caused the cemetery to sink underground, and it was never found again. The locals believed that the spirits of the dead still haunted the area, and that strange things happened to anyone who stayed there for too long. When we returned to the cabin, the first thing we did was clean the house, and then we left very soon after that. That was enough for me. No more Airbnb for a while, or ever again.